The old woman, Sarah, lived a quiet life. Her days were filled with the gentle rhythm of gardening, the sweet scent of roses, and the cheerful chirping of birds. Everyone in Harmony Creek knew Sarah. She was the kind of neighbor who always had a smile and a freshly baked cookie ready to share. Her garden was her pride and joy, a riot of color that brightened up the whole street. She knew the names of every flower and every bird that visited her little patch of paradise. Then, one Tuesday morning, Sarah vanished. Her morning routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Watering the petunias, deadheading the roses, and then a leisurely stroll to the local bakery for her favorite blueberry muffin. But that Tuesday, the petunias remained dry, the roses unkempt, and the bakery saw no sign of Sarah. A wave of unease washed over Harmony Creek. Sarah wasn't the type to just disappear. She had no family nearby, but her friends were her family, and they knew something was terribly wrong. The local sheriff, a kind man named Deputy Miller, organized a search party. Volunteers combed the woods, fields, and even the creek banks surrounding Sarah's property. They called her name, their voices echoing through the trees, but only silence answered. Days bled into weeks, and the initial flurry of activity began to slow. Hope, like the late summer sun, began to fade. The police investigated, checked local hospitals, and even put out an alert statewide, but there were no clues, no leads, nothing to indicate where Sarah might be. The town held its breath, each resident grappling with the chilling possibility that something awful had happened to their dear Sarah. The colorful blooms in her neglected garden began to droop, mirroring the heavy hearts of Harmony Creek. The cheerful birds still sang, but their melodies now seemed tinged with a mournful note. The mystery of Sarah's disappearance hung over the town like a dark cloud, casting a long shadow over their once peaceful lives. The disappearance of Sarah sent ripples of fear and worry throughout Harmony Creek. It wasn't just the loss of a friendly face, it was the shattering of their sense of security. Doors were locked that had always been left open. Neighbors, once trusting, eyed each other with suspicion. The local bakery, usually bustling with morning chatter, was now subdued, the aroma of blueberry muffins doing little to lift the somber mood. The close-knit community rallied, doing everything they could to find Sarah. Flyers with her picture were plastered on every lamppost and storefront. Bake sales and car washes were organized to raise money for a reward. Children drew pictures of Sarah in her garden, hoping their innocent artwork might somehow bring her home. Mrs. Gable, who had known Sarah since they were girls, organized daily prayer meetings at the town church. Old Mr. Abernathy, who delivered Sarah's groceries every week, drove around town, his hearing aid turned up high, listening for any whisper, any clue that might lead him to her. Even the teenagers, usually more interested in their phones than their neighbors, joined the search efforts, combing the woods on their bicycles. Deputy Miller, a man of unwavering dedication, worked tirelessly. He interviewed everyone who knew Sarah, followed up on every lead, no matter how small, and spent countless hours poring over maps and surveillance footage. He knew the odds were slim, but he refused to give up hope. He owed it to Sarah, and he owed it to the community that trusted him to protect them. But as the days turned into weeks, the search began to lose momentum. The flyers faded in the sun, the bake sales dwindled, and the prayer meetings became less frequent. The initial shock and outrage gave way to a weary resignation. People started to accept the unthinkable, that Sarah might never be found. The dark cloud over Harmony Creek seemed to grow thicker, heavier, threatening to smother the town's spirit altogether. The official investigation continued, even as the town's collective hope dwindled. Deputy Miller, fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer determination, revisited every interview, re-examined every piece of evidence, no matter how insignificant it seemed. He spent hours staring at Sarah's empty house, trying to imagine what might have happened in those final hours before she disappeared. He walked through her garden, touching the drooping flowers, feeling a pang of sadness for the life that seemed to have been so abruptly cut short. The FBI was called in, bringing with them specialized equipment and expertise. They conducted a thorough forensic search of Sarah's house and garden, looking for any trace of foul play. They analyzed her computer and phone records, searching for any unusual activity or suspicious contacts. They even brought in cadaver dogs, trained to detect the scent of human remains, to search the surrounding area. But still, nothing. No sign of a struggle, no forced entry, no witnesses, no clues. It was as if Sarah had simply vanished into thin air. The FBI eventually packed up their equipment and left, their faces grim, their report inconclusive. They promised to keep the case open, but Deputy Miller knew that the chances of finding Sarah alive were growing slimmer with each passing day. The town of Harmony Creek began to accept the reality that Sarah might be gone forever. They held a memorial service in her honor, a somber gathering filled with tears and shared memories. They planted a rose bush in her garden, a symbol of her enduring spirit. But even as they mourned her loss, a tiny spark of hope remained, flickering in the darkness, refusing to be extinguished. Deputy Miller, in particular, couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he was missing, some crucial piece of the puzzle that would unlock the mystery of Sarah's disappearance. He vowed to keep searching, to keep looking, until he found Sarah, or at least brought closure to her friends and neighbors in Harmony Creek. He felt he owed it to them, and most importantly, he owed it to Sarah. Across the neatly manicured lawn from Sarah's now silent house lived Mrs. Peterson, a woman of routine and few words. Her constant companion was Buster, a small, wiry terrier mix with a perpetually worried expression and a bark that could shatter glass. Buster was usually a quiet dog, content to nap in sunbeams or chase squirrels in the backyard. He rarely barked, and when he did, it was usually at the mailman or a particularly persistent bird. Mrs. Peterson and Sarah had been friendly, often exchanging gardening tips over the fence. Mrs. Peterson, though reserved, had felt a pang of sadness at Sarah's disappearance. She had even brought Deputy Miller a plate of cookies during the initial search, a gesture that spoke volumes for her normally reticent nature. Life had slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy for Mrs. Peterson. The town was quieter, sadder, but life went on. She continued her daily walks with Buster, tended to her own small garden, and watched the evening news. Then, one ordinary afternoon, Buster started barking. Not his usual, perfunctory bark at a passing car, but a frantic, persistent, almost desperate barking. He was fixated on Sarah's property, specifically, the old, weathered garden shed at the back of the yard. The shed had always been there, a silent sentinel guarding Sarah's gardening tools and forgotten dreams. Buster had never shown any interest in it before. Mrs. Peterson initially dismissed it as a squirrel or a stray cat. But Buster wouldn't stop. He barked and whined, scratched at the fence separating their yards, and paced back and forth, his little body trembling with urgency. Mrs. Peterson had never seen him act this way before. A flicker of unease sparked within her. Could Buster sense something? Could he somehow know something about Sarah's disappearance? The thought, however improbable, sent a shiver down her spine. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across Harmony Creek, but Buster's barking didn't cease. It grew more frantic, more desperate, as if he knew time was running out. Mrs. Peterson, despite her initial skepticism, couldn't ignore his distress any longer. She grabbed a leash and, with a sigh, clipped it onto Buster's collar. "All right, Buster," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "let's see what all the fuss is about." She walked across the lawn, the cool evening air brushing against her face. The gate separating her property from Sarah's creaked as she opened it, a sound that seemed amplified in the stillness of the evening. Buster pulled her towards the shed, his little body vibrating with excitement. The shed was old and dilapidated, its paint peeling, its wooden planks weathered and warped. It leaned slightly to one side, as if weary from years of guarding Sarah's gardening secrets. Mrs. Peterson had never paid much attention to it before, but now, standing in front of it, she felt a strange sense of foreboding. Buster began scratching at the base of the shed, near the floorboards. His nails scraped against the wood, creating a harsh, grating sound. He whined and barked, his eyes fixed on a particular section of the floor. Mrs. Peterson knelt down, her knees cracking with age, and examined the area Buster was so fixated on. She noticed that a few of the floorboards were loose, slightly out of place compared to the others. They looked old and rotten, as if they hadn't been touched in years. A faint, musty odor emanated from beneath the boards, a smell that was both familiar and unsettling. Mrs. Peterson's heart began to pound in her chest. A crazy thought entered her mind: could Sarah be under there? It was impossible, ridiculous, but Buster's unwavering persistence, combined with the strange circumstances, had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. She knew she had to investigate further. Armed with a rusty garden trowel she found leaning against the shed wall, Mrs. Peterson cautiously pried at the loose floorboards. They were brittle and rotten, crumbling easily under the pressure. The musty odor grew stronger, and Mrs. Peterson wrinkled her nose. This wasn't just the smell of old wood and damp earth, there was something else, something vaguely metallic, something unsettlingly human. Buster, sensing progress, barked encouragingly, jumping up and down, his tail wagging furiously. Mrs. Peterson managed to dislodge one of the boards, creating a small opening in the floor. She peered into the darkness below, but could see nothing. The opening was too small, the shadows too deep. She dislodged another board, then another, widening the gap until she could get a better look. The space beneath the floor was surprisingly large, much larger than she had imagined. It was dark and damp, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she began to make out shapes. Rough-hewn wooden beams supported the floor above. A pile of dirt and debris lay in one corner. And then, she saw it. A glint of something metallic, reflecting the faint light filtering through the cracks in the shed walls. Mrs. Peterson reached for her cell phone, her hands trembling. She needed more light. She fumbled with the phone, finally managing to turn on the flashlight. She pointed the beam into the darkness, and gasped. Lying on the dirt floor, huddled in a fetal position, was Sarah. She was pale and thin, her clothes torn and dirty, her eyes closed. Mrs. Peterson could barely make out her shallow breathing. Sarah was alive, but barely. "Oh, my God," Mrs. Peterson whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Sarah!" Buster, sensing the urgency, barked louder than ever, his frantic cries echoing through the silent town. Mrs. Peterson knew she had to get help, and fast. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her fingers clumsy and numb. "I found her," she cried into the phone, her voice shaking. "I found Sarah. She's under the shed." Within minutes, the quiet of Harmony Creek was shattered by the wail of sirens. Deputy Miller, who had been at home reviewing Sarah's case files again, felt a jolt of adrenaline. He recognized Mrs. Peterson's address immediately. He raced to his patrol car, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Could this be it? Could this finally be the break he had been praying for? The first responders arrived at Sarah's property, their faces etched with concern. Mrs. Peterson, still visibly shaken, directed them to the shed. The paramedics cautiously approached the opening in the floor, their flashlights illuminating the darkness below. Deputy Miller arrived moments later, his mind racing. He knelt beside Mrs. Peterson, his eyes searching hers. "What happened, Martha? What did you find?" "It's Sarah," she said, her voice trembling. "She's down there. I think she's alive." Deputy Miller's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe it. After all this time, after all the dead ends and false leads, Sarah was still alive. He quickly assessed the situation. The opening in the floor was too small for the paramedics to easily extract Sarah. He needed to widen it, and fast. "Get me an axe," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. One of the firefighters quickly retrieved an axe from the truck. Deputy Miller took it and, with a surge of adrenaline, began hacking at the remaining floorboards. The wood splintered and cracked under the force of the axe, creating a larger opening. The paramedics carefully lowered a stretcher into the space below. One of them climbed down, his flashlight beam dancing across the darkness. He assessed Sarah's condition, his face grim. She was weak and dehydrated, but she was alive. They carefully lifted her onto the stretcher and, with the help of the other paramedics, slowly raised her out of the hole. As Sarah's frail body emerged from the darkness, a collective gasp went through the crowd that had gathered. Deputy Miller felt a wave of relief wash over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. They had found her. They had actually found her. Sarah was rushed to the hospital, her fate hanging in the balance. But for the first time in weeks, there was hope in Harmony Creek. The dark cloud that had hung over the town had finally begun to lift. And it was all thanks to a persistent little dog named Buster. At the hospital, Sarah was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. Doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her, administering fluids and nutrients to combat her severe dehydration and malnutrition. She was weak and disoriented, but she was alive, and that was all that mattered. Deputy Miller stayed at the hospital, pacing the waiting room, his anxiety gnawing at him. He needed answers. He needed to know who had done this to Sarah and why. He knew that Sarah wouldn't be able to provide much information right away, but he hoped that once she regained her strength, she would be able to shed some light on her ordeal. Meanwhile, back in Harmony Creek, the news of Sarah's rescue spread like wildfire. The town erupted in celebration. People hugged and cried, their faces beaming with joy. They gathered at the local bakery, sharing stories and reminiscing about Sarah. They decorated her house with flowers and balloons, eagerly awaiting her return. Mrs. Peterson was hailed as a hero. People stopped her on the street to thank her for her bravery and quick thinking. She blushed and demurred, insisting that it was all Buster's doing. Buster, of course, lapped up the attention, wagging his tail and barking happily. He was given a mountain of treats and a brand new squeaky toy, which he promptly destroyed with gusto. Deputy Miller finally got the chance to speak with Sarah the next day. She was still weak, but her eyes were clear, and she recognized him immediately. Her voice was barely a whisper, but he leaned in close to hear her story. It was him, she said, her voice strained. The one I fired, a long time ago. Deputy Miller's blood ran cold. He knew exactly who she was talking about. A disgruntled former employee, seeking revenge. It all made sense now. The meticulous planning, the hidden space, the lack of witnesses. He had been so focused on random acts of violence, he had overlooked the most obvious suspect, someone with a personal vendetta. He said I ruined his life. Sarah continued, her voice fading. He said, he was going to ruin mine. Deputy Miller squeezed her hand gently. Don't worry, Sarah, he said, his voice filled with determination. We'll catch him. I promise you, we'll catch him. Deputy Miller immediately put out an all-points bulletin for the former employee, a man named Arthur Jenkins. Arthur had been fired from Sarah's small accounting firm 5 years earlier for embezzlement. He had always maintained his innocence, claiming that Sarah had framed him to cover up her own misdeeds. Deputy Miller had briefly considered Arthur as a suspect during the initial investigation, but Arthur had an alibi, he was working at a construction site in a neighboring state. However, Deputy Miller now realized that Arthur's alibi was flimsy at best. He had likely paid someone to vouch for him, or simply lied about his whereabouts. The police began a manhunt for Arthur, searching his last known address, contacting his family and friends, and tracking his credit card and phone records. They soon discovered that Arthur had recently quit his job and withdrawn a large sum of money from his bank account. He had vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Sarah continued to recover, slowly regaining her strength and appetite. She was surrounded by loved ones, who showered her with flowers, cards, and heartfelt messages. She was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from her community. She learned about Buster's role in her rescue and insisted on meeting him. Mrs. Peterson brought Buster to the hospital, where Sarah showered him with praise and affection. Buster, in turn, licked her face and wagged his tail, as if to say, "I'm just glad you're okay." As the days passed, the police investigation intensified. They received several tips from the public, but none of them led to Arthur. Deputy Miller began to fear that Arthur had fled the state, or even the country. But then, a break in the case. A waitress at a diner in a nearby town recognized Arthur from a news report. She said he had been in the diner that morning, acting nervous and suspicious. She had written down the license plate number of his car. Deputy Miller and a team of officers raced to the town, hoping to intercept Arthur before he could escape. They located his car parked outside a motel. They surrounded the motel and cautiously approached Arthur's room. Deputy Miller knocked on the door. "Arthur Jenkins, open up. This is the police." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a window breaking. Deputy Miller kicked down the door and burst into the room. Arthur was gone. He had jumped out the window and fled into the woods. The chase was on. The woods surrounding the motel were dense and unforgiving, the trees thick and the undergrowth tangled. Arthur, fueled by desperation and adrenaline, scrambled through the underbrush, his lungs burning, his legs aching. He knew he couldn't outrun the police forever, but he had to buy himself some time. He had to find a way to escape. Deputy Miller and his team followed close behind, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They could hear Arthur crashing through the trees ahead, his movements clumsy and erratic. They were gaining on him. Arthur stumbled upon a small stream and waded through it, hoping to throw off his pursuers. He knew it was a long shot, but he had to try something. He emerged from the stream on the other side, shivering and soaked to the bone. He continued to run, his path leading him deeper into the woods. He could hear the police closing in, their voices growing louder, their flashlights growing brighter. He knew it was only a matter of time before they caught him. Suddenly, he tripped over a fallen log and went sprawling to the ground. He lay there for a moment, dazed and disoriented. He tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't respond. He was exhausted, defeated. Deputy Miller and his team surrounded him, their guns drawn. Arthur didn't resist. He knew it was over. He raised his hands in surrender, his face etched with despair. "It's over, Arthur," Deputy Miller said, his voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest." Arthur was taken into custody and transported back to Harmony Creek. He was charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. He was held without bail, awaiting trial. Back at the hospital, Sarah received the news of Arthur's arrest with a sense of relief. She knew that she could finally start to heal, knowing that her tormentor was behind bars. She thanked Deputy Miller for his unwavering dedication and for bringing her justice. The town of Harmony Creek rejoiced at Arthur's capture. They knew that they could finally put this nightmare behind them. They celebrated Sarah's recovery and praised Mrs. Peterson and Buster for their heroic efforts. The nightmare was over. Harmony Creek could finally breathe again. But the scars of Sarah's disappearance would remain, a reminder of the darkness that had briefly threatened to engulf their peaceful town. And a testament to the power of community, hope, and the unwavering loyalty of a little dog named Buster. 5 years earlier, Arthur Jenkins had been a promising young accountant at Sarah's firm. He was intelligent, hardworking, and ambitious. Sarah had seen great potential in him and had given him several opportunities to advance his career. But Arthur had a dark secret: he was deeply in debt. He had gambled away his savings and was desperate to recoup his losses. He saw Sarah's firm as his ticket to financial freedom. He began to embezzle small amounts of money from the company accounts, hoping that no one would notice. But Sarah, a meticulous and detail-oriented woman, soon discovered his deception. She confronted him, giving him a chance to confess and make amends. Arthur denied everything, accusing Sarah of being unfair and vindictive. He claimed that she was trying to ruin his life. Sarah, heartbroken and disappointed, had no choice but to fire him. Arthur was devastated. He lost his job, his reputation, and his chance at a successful career. He blamed Sarah for everything that had gone wrong in his life. He became consumed by anger and resentment. He vowed to get revenge on Sarah, to make her pay for what she had done to him. He spent years plotting and planning, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. He knew that he couldn't simply confront her, he had to do something that would truly devastate her. He decided to kidnap her and hold her captive, to make her suffer the same way he had suffered. He began to secretly construct a hidden space beneath the floor of her garden shed, a place where he could hold her prisoner without anyone knowing. He spent months gathering supplies, carefully avoiding detection. He knew that if he was caught, his plan would be ruined. He had to be patient, meticulous, and ruthless. Finally, the day came when he was ready to put his plan into action. He knew Sarah's routine, her habits, her vulnerabilities. He waited for her to leave her house one morning, then ambushed her, forcing her into his car and driving her to her garden shed. He dragged her inside, gagged her, and bound her hands and feet. He lowered her into the hidden space beneath the floor, sealing her fate. He had finally exacted his revenge. Or so he thought. The hidden space was small and cramped, barely large enough for Sarah to lie down. The walls were damp and earthen, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. Arthur had provided her with a thin blanket and a small bottle of water, but little else. He visited her sporadically, usually at night, bringing her small amounts of food and water. He would taunt her, reminding her of how she had ruined his life. He would tell her that she deserved to suffer, that she was getting what she deserved. Sarah tried to reason with him, to appeal to his sense of humanity. She told him that she hadn't wanted to fire him, that she had only done what was necessary. She told him that she was sorry for what had happened, that she didn't want him to suffer. But Arthur wouldn't listen. He was blinded by his anger and resentment. He was determined to make her pay, no matter the cost. He kept her drugged, using a mild sedative to keep her docile and compliant. He didn't want her to try to escape, or to make too much noise. He needed to keep her hidden, to keep his plan from unraveling. He had initially intended to kill her, to end her life in a final act of revenge. But as he watched her suffer, he realized that death was too easy. He wanted her to endure the same pain and humiliation that he had endured. He wanted her to lose everything, just as he had lost everything. He planned to keep her captive for as long as possible, slowly draining her of her spirit and her will to live. He wanted her to become a shell of her former self, a broken and defeated woman. But he hadn't counted on Buster. He hadn't anticipated that a small, unassuming dog would be the one to foil his carefully laid plans. He hadn't realized that even in the darkest of times, hope could still find a way to prevail. He underestimated the power of loyalty, compassion, and the unwavering bond between humans and animals. And that was his downfall. Back in the present, Deputy Miller questioned Arthur, hoping to understand the full extent of his depravity. Arthur remained defiant, insisting that Sarah had deserved everything that had happened to her. He showed no remorse, no regret. Deputy Miller learned that Arthur's plan had been evolving. He had initially intended to keep Sarah captive for a few weeks, then release her in a remote location, leaving her to fend for herself. But as he watched her suffer, his plans had become more sinister. He had begun to consider killing her, but he wanted to make it look like an accident. He had even contemplated staging a break-in at her house, then killing her during the robbery. But then, Buster had intervened. Arthur had noticed the dog barking at the shed, and he knew that his carefully laid plans were in jeopardy. He had considered killing Buster, but he was afraid of attracting attention. He had decided to move Sarah to another location, a more secure place where she couldn't be found. He had even started digging a new hiding place in the woods, a remote and isolated spot where he could keep her captive indefinitely. He had planned to move her that very night, but Buster's barking had forced him to act sooner. He had panicked, fleeing the motel and hoping to evade capture. Deputy Miller was disgusted by Arthur's callousness and cruelty. He couldn't understand how someone could be so consumed by hatred and revenge. He knew that Arthur would spend the rest of his life in prison, paying for his crimes. He visited Sarah at the hospital, updating her on the investigation. She was grateful for his efforts, but she was still struggling to cope with what had happened to her. "I just don't understand why he did it," she said, her voice trembling. "Why he hated me so much." Deputy Miller sighed. "Some people are just filled with darkness, Sarah," he said. "There's no explaining it. The important thing is that you're safe now. You're home." Sarah smiled weakly. "Yes," she said. "I'm home. And I'm grateful for that." The explanation for Buster's sudden, persistent barking was simple: he could hear Sarah. The shed was old and poorly constructed, with gaps and cracks in the walls and floor. Sound traveled easily through the thin wooden planks and the loose-fitting boards. Buster, with his exceptionally sensitive hearing, could pick up even the faintest sounds. Sarah, weakened by hunger and dehydration, often whimpered and cried out in her sleep. She would call out for help, her voice barely audible above a whisper. She would moan in pain, her body aching from lying on the hard, earthen floor. Buster, who spent much of his time in Mrs. Peterson's backyard, could hear these faint sounds. He couldn't understand what they meant, but he knew that they were coming from the shed. He knew that someone was in distress. He had initially tried to ignore the sounds, dismissing them as the wind or the creaking of the old shed. But the sounds persisted, growing louder and more frequent. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He began to bark at the shed, hoping to alert someone to the danger. He barked and whined, scratched at the fence, and paced back and forth, trying to get Mrs. Peterson's attention. Mrs. Peterson, initially annoyed by Buster's behavior, eventually realized that something was amiss. She knew that Buster wasn't usually a barker, and she couldn't ignore his distress any longer. She investigated the shed, discovering the loose floorboards and the musty odor. She realized that something was hidden beneath the floor, and she knew that she had to find out what it was. Buster's sensitive hearing had been the key to Sarah's rescue. Without his persistent barking, Mrs. Peterson would never have investigated the shed, and Sarah would have remained hidden, her fate sealed. Buster was a hero, a testament to the power of animal instinct and the unwavering loyalty of a dog. He had saved Sarah's life, simply by doing what came naturally to him, listening. He had heard her cries for help, and he had refused to give up until someone came to her rescue. His small act of bravery had made all the difference in the world. The neighboring town where Arthur was apprehended was called Willow Creek, a small, quiet community much like Harmony Creek. It was a place where people knew their neighbors and looked out for one another. Arthur had chosen Willow Creek because it was close enough to Harmony Creek for him to keep tabs on Sarah, but far enough away to avoid detection. He had rented a small, secluded cabin in the woods, hoping to lie low until the heat died down. But the waitress at the diner had recognized him from a news report, and she had done the right thing by alerting the authorities. Her quick thinking had been instrumental in Arthur's capture. The police in Willow Creek had been surprised to learn that a kidnapper had been hiding in their town. They had cooperated fully with Deputy Miller and his team, providing them with whatever assistance they needed. The arrest itself had been uneventful. Arthur had surrendered peacefully, knowing that he was outnumbered and outgunned. He had offered no resistance, showing no emotion. He was transported back to Harmony Creek, where he was booked into the county jail. He was kept in solitary confinement, away from the other inmates. The trial was set for several months later. Arthur pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing Arthur's motive, his planning, and his execution of the kidnapping. Sarah testified at the trial, recounting her ordeal with courage and dignity. She described the fear, the pain, and the humiliation that she had endured. She spoke of the darkness that had consumed Arthur, and she expressed her hope that he would never be able to harm anyone again. The jury deliberated for several hours before returning a verdict, guilty on all counts. Arthur was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had been served. Sarah could finally find peace, knowing that her tormentor was behind bars. And the town of Harmony Creek could finally close this chapter of their history, moving forward with hope and resilience. Sarah's recovery was a slow and arduous process. She had lost a significant amount of weight, and her body was weak and frail. She suffered from nightmares and flashbacks, reliving the horror of her captivity. But she was determined to heal, both physically and emotionally. She knew that she couldn't let Arthur's actions define her. She had to find a way to move forward, to reclaim her life. The outpouring of love and support from Harmony Creek was overwhelming. People visited her at the hospital, bringing her flowers, cards, and gifts. They offered her words of encouragement and comfort. They assured her that she was loved and valued. Mrs. Gable organized a group of volunteers to help Sarah clean and repair her house. They scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and repainted the walls. They transformed her house into a warm and welcoming home. Old Mr. Abernathy resumed delivering Sarah's groceries, bringing her fresh produce and homemade baked goods. He would sit with her for hours, sharing stories and reminiscing about the good old days. Even the teenagers, who had initially been skeptical of Sarah, now rallied around her, offering to run errands and help with chores. They had come to realize that Sarah was more than just an old woman, she was a symbol of resilience and hope. Buster became a regular visitor at the hospital, cheering Sarah up with his playful antics and unwavering affection. He would curl up at the foot of her bed, offering her comfort and companionship. Sarah was deeply moved by the kindness and generosity of her community. She had always known that Harmony Creek was a special place, but she had never fully appreciated the depth of its compassion. She realized that she wasn't alone. She had a whole town of people who loved and cared about her. And that gave her the strength to face her fears and to begin the long journey towards healing. She knew that she would never forget what had happened to her, but she also knew that she wouldn't let it define her. She was a survivor, and she was determined to live her life to the fullest. Buster, the scruffy terrier mix with the heart of a lion, became an overnight sensation. He was featured in the local newspaper, interviewed on the radio, and even received a handwritten letter from the governor. But more than the fame, Buster enjoyed the outpouring of affection from the townspeople. Everyone wanted to pet him, scratch his ears, and give him treats. He lapped up the attention, wagging his tail and barking happily. Mrs. Peterson, initially overwhelmed by the attention, quickly embraced her role as Buster's guardian. She became a de facto spokesperson for the dog, sharing stories about his loyalty and bravery. The town of Harmony Creek decided to throw Buster a Buster Appreciation Day, a celebration of his heroic deeds. They closed down Main Street, set up a stage, and invited everyone to attend. The event was a huge success. Hundreds of people showed up, many bringing their own dogs to honor Buster. There were games, contests, and a barbecue. The local bakery made a giant dog-shaped cake, which Buster promptly devoured. The highlight of the day was a special ceremony where Buster was presented with a Medal of Valor. Deputy Miller, acting as the master of ceremonies, praised Buster for his unwavering determination and his crucial role in Sarah's rescue. Buster, seemingly understanding the importance of the occasion, stood proudly on the stage, wagging his tail and barking to the cheers of the crowd. He was the hero of Harmony Creek, and he knew it. The townspeople showered Buster with gifts, including a mountain of treats, a pile of new toys, and a cozy new dog bed. Mrs. Peterson was presented with a certificate of appreciation, recognizing her role in fostering Buster's heroism. Buster Appreciation Day became an annual event in Harmony Creek, a celebration of the power of animal companionship and the importance of community. It was a reminder that even the smallest creatures can make a big difference in the world. And it was a testament to the unwavering bond between humans and animals, a bond that can overcome even the darkest of times. The day Sarah returned home was a joyous occasion. The entire town turned out to welcome her back, lining the streets with banners and balloons. They cheered and waved as her car drove slowly through town, a police escort leading the way. Sarah was overwhelmed by the show of support. Tears streamed down her face as she waved back at the crowd, her heart filled with gratitude. She knew that she would never forget this day, the day she came home. Mrs. Peterson and Buster were waiting for her at her house, standing on the porch with smiles on their faces. Sarah rushed to greet them, embracing them both tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for saving my life." Mrs. Peterson simply smiled and squeezed her hand. Buster, sensing the emotion, licked her face and wagged his tail. Sarah spent the next few weeks settling back into her routine. She tended to her garden, visited with her friends, and enjoyed the simple pleasures of life. She found solace in the familiar surroundings, the comforting routines, and the unwavering support of her community. She made a point of spending time with Mrs. Peterson and Buster, inviting them over for tea and cookies, and taking them on walks through the neighborhood. She wanted to show them how much she appreciated their friendship and their heroic actions. She also made a promise to herself to live each day to the fullest, to appreciate the beauty of the world around her, and to never take anything for granted. She had been given a second chance at life, and she was determined to make the most of it. She knew that the scars of her captivity would always remain, but she refused to let them define her. She was a survivor, and she was determined to live her life with joy, purpose, and gratitude. And she knew that she owed it all to Mrs. Peterson and Buster, the unlikely heroes who had saved her from the darkness and brought her back into the light. She would be forever grateful for their unwavering loyalty, their compassion, and their heroic actions. They had given her the greatest gift of all, the gift of life. The garden shed, once a symbol of fear and captivity, underwent a transformation. Sarah, with the help of the community, repaired the damaged structure, replacing the rotten floorboards and repainting the weathered walls. She wanted to reclaim the shed, to erase the memories of the darkness and despair that had haunted it. She wanted to turn it into a place of beauty and hope, a symbol of resilience and new beginnings. She decided to create a special flower garden around the shed, a vibrant display of colors and fragrances that would honor Buster's bravery. She chose flowers that were known for their beauty, their resilience, and their ability to attract pollinators. She planted sunflowers, their bright yellow faces turned towards the sun, symbolizing hope and optimism. She planted lavender, its soothing scent promoting calmness and relaxation. She planted roses, their delicate petals representing love and gratitude. She also planted a special variety of flower called Buster's Blooms, a hybrid she created herself, a mix of vibrant colors that mirrored Buster's playful personality. These flowers became a local favorite, a symbol of courage and unwavering spirit. She spent hours tending to the garden, weeding, watering, and pruning the flowers. She found solace in the act of nurturing life, of creating something beautiful out of something broken. The garden became a sanctuary, a place where she could reflect on her experiences and find peace. She would often sit in the garden, surrounded by the fragrant blooms, and read a book, listen to music, or simply enjoy the beauty of nature. Buster, of course, loved the garden. He would often wander through the flowers, sniffing the fragrant blooms and chasing butterflies. He seemed to understand that the garden was dedicated to him, a tribute to his heroism. The shed and the garden became a popular attraction in Harmony Creek, a place where people could come to remember Sarah's ordeal and to celebrate the power of hope, resilience, and the unwavering loyalty of a little dog named Buster. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, beauty can still bloom. And that even the smallest creatures can make a big difference in the world. Sarah's story became a legend in Harmony Creek, a testament to the power of the human spirit and the unwavering bond between humans and animals. It was a story that was passed down from generation to generation, a reminder of the values that defined their community. They learned that even in the darkest of times, hope can still prevail. They learned that even when all seems lost, there is always a reason to keep fighting. They learned that even the smallest creatures can make a big difference in the world. They learned the importance of community, of coming together to support one another in times of need. They learned that by working together, they could overcome any obstacle, no matter how daunting it may seem. They learned the value of resilience, of bouncing back from adversity and emerging stronger than before. They learned that even though scars may remain, they can serve as a reminder of the challenges they have overcome and the strength they have found within themselves. And they learned the unwavering loyalty of a dog, the unconditional love and companionship that animals can provide. They learned that animals can be more than just pets, they can be heroes, protectors, and sources of comfort and joy. Harmony Creek became known as a town of compassion, a place where people cared about one another and valued the bonds that connected them. It was a place where hope bloomed, even in the face of darkness. It was a place where the spirit of community thrived, and where the loyalty of a dog could save a life. And it was all thanks to Sarah, Mrs. Peterson, and Buster, the unlikely heroes who had shown them the way. Their story would forever be etched in the hearts and minds of the people of Harmony Creek, a reminder of the lessons they had learned and the values they had embraced. It was a story of hope, resilience, and the power of community. And it was a story that would continue to inspire them for generations to come. Years passed. The scars of Sarah's ordeal faded, replaced by the warmth of love, friendship, and community. The garden continued to bloom, a vibrant testament to the resilience of life and the power of hope. Sarah, now even more beloved than before, continued to tend to her garden, finding solace in the familiar routines and the beauty of nature. She spent her days reading, visiting with friends, and volunteering at the local library. Buster, now an old and graying dog, remained her constant companion, always by her side, offering his unwavering loyalty and affection. He still enjoyed chasing butterflies in the garden, although his pace was a little slower now. On a peaceful afternoon, Sarah sat in her garden, the warm sun